Before we get into today's stories, visit dreadsarmy.com to sign up for the Dread Weekly newsletter so you don't miss out on any updates. Also, check out all of the channels in the Dread Network on dreadsarmy.com or in the description below. Thanks for listening. Now let's get to the stories. I'm a plumber. Been doing it for over 25 years now. The job's taken me to all sorts of weird and wonderful places, but none were as strange as this place was. A half-abandoned building, nestled on the edge of a neglected part of town that was better off forgotten. It was late October. The chill of the fall air was starting to seep in. My boots crunched on the gravel as I pulled up. When I first got the call about a plumbing emergency out there, I thought it was some kind of prank. But the request came from the city office. They said the building was in use for some government stock or something. Who am I to judge? A job is a job. The looming structure cut an imposing figure against the dull gray sky. Its weathered bricks had seen better days, and the windows were boarded up, giving off an eerie vibe. The skeletal trees surrounding it didn't do much to dissuade my growing sense of unease either. It felt quiet, too quiet, like the world held its breath around this place. As I approached the entrance, the smell hit me first. An unpleasant mix of dampness and decay, not uncommon for old buildings, but this was stronger somehow, more pervasive. A faint chirping of the crickets was the only sound cutting into the dead silence, as if nature itself was afraid to disturb this building. I found the busted pipe in the basement. The water flow had been shut off from the main, but there was a musty smell that hung in the air, an undercurrent of something acrid, almost sulfuric. It was different, off. The pipe looked gnashed, covered in scrapes and dents. I figured the building's age was causing the infrastructure to crumble, but something about it didn't seem right. It almost looked like bite marks. I shrugged off the thought, reasoning it was probably some vermin or a raccoon. The basement was in dire need of a cleanup job. Among the dust-cobwebbed corners and scattered debris, I noticed a pile of old furniture shrouded in a thick, moth-eaten cloth. The air felt heavy, oppressive, and despite myself, I felt a chill run down my spine. Kneeling down by the damaged pipe, my flashlight began to flicker. I remember thinking, just my luck. The silence was deafening around me, interrupted only by the low hum of my tools and the sporadic, flickering light painting grotesque shadows all around. Suddenly, the temperature seemed to drop drastically. A chill swept through the room like an all-consuming fog, the sort of chill that sinks deep into your bones. That's when I heard it, a low guttural growl echoing from the unseen corners of the basement. It was distant, barely audible, but it was there, a rumbling growl, like that of a dog but deeper, resonating within that cold, quiet basement. But those were thoughts for later. I shrugged both the cold and the growl, attributing it to the wind howling outside. After all, I had a pipe to fix. No sooner had I pushed these unsettling thoughts aside that I heard it again, this time louder, more menacing. A low growling sound that seemed to vibrate through the emptiness. I shook it off once more, but I felt my mind pull itself back to those strange dents on the pipe. The thought of a raccoon making those marks somehow seemed less plausible. I heard the odd sound once more, louder and much clearer than before. It was unmistakably a growl, guttural and menacing. A primal fear began to seep into my veins. That's when I noticed, amongst the rat-infested pile and dust-covered debris, movement, slow but deliberate. An ominous shadow was all I saw, hunched and lurking. Just the sight of the shadow struck me cold. It was huge, easily 7 to 9 feet, and it was not human. Right then, every fiber of my being screamed to bolt, to get away from this place as fast as possible. There, standing in that basement with the damaged pipe and the low growling that hung in the silence, I felt a fear I hadn't felt since childhood. The mysterious creature, the ruined pipe, those growls, it all made a horrific sense. Collecting my nerves, I started to pack up my tools. My mind was ordering my hands to work faster, but icy terror made them sluggish, clumsy. The growling was getting louder, closer. As I finally picked up my tool bag, my flashlight flared back to life, and for a moment, it illuminated the beast behind the growl. I would never forget what I saw. A creature with the look of a hyena, a face that was nothing short of demonic. It had a snarling mouth filled with double rows of razor-sharp fangs and large pointy ears. Its body, hunched on human-like legs, was covered in dark fur. Its chest, wide and powerful, spoke of unnerving strength. I saw the eyes just as my flashlight flickered and died again, intelligent and cold with an unworldly intensity. In what felt like a purely instinctive response, I turned and fled, leaving all my tools behind. The growls seemed to follow me as I sprinted up the stairs, echoing through the building. I wouldn't look back. I threw myself into my van, hit the gas, and got the hell out of there. Months have gone by since that chilling encounter, but its memory is as fresh as if it happened yesterday. I can still feel the cold dread when I remember that night, in the basement with the thing. The damp, musty smell, sulfuric, almost like wet dog mixed with rotting meat. The chilling echo of that growl. The way it looked at me. Every time I pass by an old, forgotten building, I feel an involuntary shudder. An intense sense of wariness washes over me. City officials dismissed my claims, saying wild animals were normal for abandoned structures. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But one thing's for sure, not a single person has been able to explain the strange destruction of that pipe. Now, I can't help but wonder what else might be lurking out there, in the shadowy corners of forgotten places, living, existing amongst us. The thought shakes me with a startling realization. Sometimes, the most disturbing things hide where no one thinks to look, just like that half-abandoned building. It was spring of 2014, and I was staying with friends in Salt Lake City for a few days. The weather was fantastic, the roads were clear, and it seemed like the perfect time to stretch my legs and head out on a solo overnight trip to see some great hiking trails. I had never hiked in Utah before, but I was excited to see some of its beautiful forests and trails and to just check out for a few days. I found that there are many websites that gave direction as to where is good to explore, and also some visual imagery books online that provided detailed accounts on certain trails for people who want to explore on their own. This saved me a lot of money and time by planning out the trails for myself. So I drove the 4-hour or so trip south to Dixie National Forest, found a beautiful spot to camp and settled in. The beautiful rock formations made me think I might stay longer than I had intended. It was absolutely gorgeous. An hour or so later, I ventured out and found a nice trailhead with a little bit of everything. Mountains with waterfalls, cliffs, small caves, and forest. I had my backpack ready with plenty of water and snacks, along with a camera and first aid kit. I had never hiked with so many beautiful things to look at. In fact, I was starting to feel overwhelmed on which trail I should take, and wanted to be sure to see all the best stuff. There were not very many people out hiking yet, and after a few hours my mind started playing tricks on me. It seemed like there was always someone in the shadows of every corner. Was this my imagination, or was something else going on? Maybe I just really needed to relax and clear my head. Maybe this weirdness was just detoxing the real world out of my system. Anyway, I stayed alert and just walked forward. I didn't venture off the trail since I did not want to be careless in case there may have been bears or other wild animals lurking around. I was also thinking there might be snakes hiding off the trails, and I'm crazy, stupid scared of those. After about another hour of walking, the sun suddenly went down, and it became very dark. I wasn't used to it getting so dark so fast, since that doesn't seem to happen where I live. And now I found myself where there were no lights anywhere, and I could barely see further than 30 or 40 feet ahead of me. Luckily, I had a headlamp in my pack, and I put it on to see where I was going. I didn't want to admit quite yet that I might not be heading in the direction I needed to be. It wasn't long until I started noticing that the trees around me looked very odd. Their bark looked unusual, and I started to think that they looked like figures swaying in the dark. Their branches also made strange sounds, as if something was moving underneath them. My curiosity, okay, it was really fear, became too overwhelming, so I stopped to take photos of it all with my camera, telling myself it was a really cool photo opportunity. I set the delay on the camera and started taking pictures. I told myself, for documentation purposes. That's when I noticed just how quiet it really was around me. No birds, no crickets, not even the sound of trees blowing in the wind, even though I was clearly watching them move. At this point, I knew there was a good chance I may have been lost, so I wanted to keep looking for the trail markers, hoping to find something I knew. I didn't want to turn back because that was obviously not the right direction. I had packed my hiking sticks with me, so I pulled them out, figuring it would be easy if I just needed to jab something that looked dangerous or out of the ordinary. And right when I got them out and started walking with them, that's when I saw it. The thing was about 10 yards away, and he was staring directly at me, his eyes gleaming back in the reflection of my headlamp. He looked like a dog, with a dog head and dog eyes, but his body was massive compared to his head size. He was probably 7 feet tall and just loomed over everything around. I froze. My head was trying to figure out why this dog would be so big, and then all of a sudden, all of my senses kicked in, and I realized that I was in deep danger. I trembled uncontrollably and couldn't run. That thing was standing on 2 legs and started to walk towards me, slowly, which seems like a good thing, but the confidence in its slow, purposeful walk was the scariest thing I've ever seen. It was so surreal because it walked like a human, while having mostly only dog features from the neck up. But then its arms were so long, and his hands were like dog paws, and they were massive. I had to run. My brain knew that I had to run, but my legs weren't responding. I turned the headlamp towards the trail and headed as fast as I could down the trail, trying to find markers of any kind. Basically, hoping I was headed in the right direction. But the creature followed, and he was breathing heavily behind me, close enough for me to hear it. I was all too aware of his hot breath raging out of his mouth, and my head was pounding, and the blood rushing through it sounded like thunder in my ears. The creature's dog paws hitting the ground was loud too, loud enough that I could tell he was close to me. At one point, I turned around to look and was dumbfounded to see that he was running only on his back legs, just like a human would run. And now I was able to see what he looked like in full view. His eyes were glowing and his mouth was dripping with saliva. His fur was moving as it ran. And then there was the smell. It was all terrifying. And then, in what seemed like a split second, before I could do anything, he was right next to me, almost as if like magic. And he swatted at me, but I dodged away just in time before turning and continuing to run for my life. The thing's dog claws cut through my long-sleeve shirt and barely missed my skin. The thought of getting seriously injured or even killed ran through my mind. It was all too real at this point. I knew I had to get out of there, fast, before this thing got another chance at me, since he was obviously very fast, very smart, and very sneaky. I kept running as fast as my legs could move until the creature finally gave up chasing me. It just totally disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. I knew it had given up, or basically decided to stop on its own, because it had already proved to be much faster than I could have ever run. And next, all I was aware of was that I could hear a dog barking in the distance. Was it the creature or someone's pet? Hopefully someone's pet. But the barking seemed to be getting further and further away with each passing second, so I couldn't figure it out. The truth is that the barking actually made me feel a little bit safer, thinking that maybe it was just a regular pet dog after all. But I still didn't know for sure, so I kept running, hoping to find someone who could help me. And then, just like that, I came across a trail marker that I had never seen before. I studied it for a second and then realized that it was taking me in the right direction. So, from there on out, I pretty much just followed the markers and eventually made my way back to camp. I can't tell you how this encounter has completely changed my life. It's been over 7 years at this point, and I still won't solo camp or head out on the hiking trails alone. The fear of being alone is so strong for me now. I just hope that someday I can put this trauma behind me and get back to being myself. Even now, that creature runs through my head every time I go out on the trails with friends, and I truly feel like something bad is going to happen. that the thing is always there. Honestly, that encounter still haunts me to this day, like some sort of unreal dream, but very real. I'm scared. I just don't know if I will ever be myself again. On a positive note, I did get a picture of the creature while it was chasing me. I just need to figure out how to get it online. I have a story from my time as a state police officer in northwestern Montana. There were a few odd situations over the years, but nothing compares to this. I was sent out to a rural homestead to investigate a complaint of property damage and potential theft. The homestead was an off-grid cabin about as deep in the mountains as you could get while still having access to a halfway decent road in the winter to make it to and from town. The couple that lived there were odd, to say the least. They were mostly self-sustainable out there. They raised a few farm animals and grew a lot of their own food and stored it over the winter in a root cellar. It was nearing the end of fall, and most of the mountain roads were closed for the winter. The drive up to the cabin was a little hairy, but I made it okay. When I arrived, the only thing I knew was that something happened involving the root cellar, but I waited for them to tell me their story. And it was quite the story at that. It began last summer. They noticed food going missing from their garden. They figured it was the local wildlife and installed a fence around the garden, but food continued to disappear. The garden was done for the season, but I checked the fence. It was 8 feet tall, and there were no signs of animals getting through or under the fence. The only way into the garden was through a gate, and the couple both said they never once found the gate unlatched. They installed a mess cover on top of the fence to prevent any birds or animals that could climb the fence. There was truly nowhere that an animal could get through this fence. Now, wildlife eating through people's gardens is definitely a problem out here, but it wasn't something you'd call the police for. After harvesting the garden and moving everything into the root cellar, someone or something began breaking in and stealing food from there. And here is where it gets weird. There were no signs of any animals, no prints, no scat. The door to the root cellar was not damaged in any way, but there was a significant amount of things missing. They told me that pretty much everything in there was stored in various sizes of mason jars. The entire jars were missing. Nothing was knocked on the ground, just vanished. If the food thief was an animal of some sort, we'd expect to see jars on the ground and things damaged or broken in the cellar, but there was none of that. The man just looked at me. I could tell he wanted to speak, but something stopped him. I told him to go ahead, that I've probably heard stranger theories. He told me he had been watching the root cellar through the window every night for the past 2 weeks, and he finally saw the culprit. He said it was a human, but it wasn't a normal human. He didn't know whether to call the police or fish and wildlife. I asked him to elaborate, and he said he saw the thief heading to the cellar just after dark, and it was definitely a person. The lack of outside lights made it difficult to see, but he went outside to confront the suspected food thief and scare him off. He met him coming out of the cellar carrying a leather bag full of mason jars. The man said he was human, but he wasn't human like we were. He had a large brow ridge and deep-set eyes. His face and body were square-shaped, and he was only maybe 5 feet tall. He was wearing boots and clothes that appeared to be made from fur and animal hide. The man said it was like looking at some prehistoric history book. He yelled at the thief and it took off running towards the forest, but before it did, it reached into its bag and tried to hand the man something. He didn't take it, but the person or creature or whatever dropped it on the ground and ran. He followed the thief to the edge of the forest, but it was too dark to try to track whatever it was. He went back to inspect the root cellar and see what all had been taken. It was at that moment that he looked on the ground for what the creature tried to offer him. There were arrowheads, spear points, and a couple of other stone tools. I had absolutely no idea what to do about this case. I took the arrowheads for evidence, but I didn't have anything else to go on. We couldn't find a trail in the forest to even attempt to track the creature. I was straight with the couple. I told them there wasn't much I could do here. They asked if anyone else in the area had been seeing these people. The man was convinced that there are, I don't know how to say it without sounding crazy, but cave people living out in the mountains completely isolated from the rest of society. He said he wasn't sure if they were a separate species of human or not, but that they could be the cause for all the Bigfoot stories in the area. I can't say if I believed him or not. I never saw the creature. I did, however, follow up with the couple in the spring of the year. They were both out working in the garden when I arrived and had expanded it quite a bit. And strangely, they said they weren't having any problems anymore. On my way back to my vehicle, I glanced at the root cellar. The door had a display of arrowheads along the top that wasn't there last fall. I didn't ask any more questions. Looking back, I wished I had, but at the same time, I don't think I was ready to know what exactly lives out there in the mountains. Hi Donovan, I've been a big fan of your channel over the last few months, but have always been a bit skeptical of the stories I have heard. I'm not skeptical anymore. Something happened to me this weekend, and I'm hoping someone out there can shed some light on it. I'm big into cycling and spend most of my free time training or competing in events. I live in central PA, and most of the competitive events in my area happen during the summer months, so I spend fall and winter staying in shape and getting in as much bike time as possible. My goal this day was to hit a 70-mile round trip in 5 hours. For some cyclists, that's almost a leisurely stroll, but I live in a mountainous area and am riding uphill for a good portion of that time. I left around 11 a.m. and planned to be back just before dark at around 5. The first leg of my ride was pleasant if a little cold. Despite a lot of sharp curves, there isn't much traffic in the area, so I don't have to be overly cautious of cars. The trouble came on my way back. It was around 2:30 p.m. when I turned around to make the trip home. I had lost some time as I had run into a few other cyclists I knew and spent a little time chatting with them. In passing, they had mentioned seeing some military vehicles, but I didn't really think much of it, though there weren't any military bases nearby. So, riding a little harder than usual, I started home hoping to still reach my front door by 5 p.m. It didn't take long before I hit a literal roadblock. There was a deep green Humvee stretched across the narrow road, and 3 men in forest camouflage standing around. 2 were holding what looked like assault rifles, and the third was sitting behind the wheel. I was told the road beyond was impassable due to a rock slide, and I would need to take an alternate route. Explaining that I could navigate through on my bike came to no avail, and that I was basically SOL. I know that the military responding to such an insignificant incident was odd, but didn't really give it much thought, as all my attention was drawn to the fact that the only other route home I knew was going to take me 2 hours out of my way. Passes through the mountains are few and far between. So, I turned back around and began my extended ride home. Calling it a road does it more justice than it deserves. It was a single-lane potholed nightmare, and I always avoided it for just that reason. But it's all I had. Going slower than normal, because of the poor road conditions, I began making my way down it. After about 30 minutes, I was beginning to think that maybe it wasn't so bad. The road seemed to have been patched in a few places, and some of the lower hanging tree limbs had been trimmed. I was slowing down to take a drink of water from my bottle when I caught something from the corner of my eye. It was moving as fast as I, whatever it was. I thought maybe it was a deer or something, but it had more of a loping gait than a deer's prance. Not really concerned, I came to a full stop to try to get a better look. It was behind a thick patch of brush about 30 yards away. It was hard to make out any details, but it was covered in muddied brown fur. Thinking it might be a black bear, I started pedaling again, keeping my eyes on it. Bears nearly never attack people, but I figured it's best not to chance it. Then it stood up. Its head crested the 7-foot-high patch of bushes. An elongated muzzle like a wolf sat in front of a pair of narrow amber eyes. It opened its maw and let out an almost human-like scream. I took off down the road, pumping as fast as my legs would let me. I heard it crash through the forest undergrowth as it leapt out onto the road behind me. Despite being on an uneven road, I had to be going over 30 miles per hour, and it was keeping up with me. I could hear its padded footsteps coming from behind, and it let out another skin-crawling howl. I have never ridden so hard in my entire life. 10 minutes, then 15 minutes, then 20 minutes later, this thing was still behind me. If it wasn't for the pure adrenaline of terror, I would have collapsed already. Anytime I felt even the slightest urge to slow, the creature let out another feral scream and my energy became renewed. At one point, I came to a sharp curve and one of those blind spot mirrors was mounted along the roadside. It had been knocked out of place and was positioned so I could see what was behind me. It was running on all fours. Fangs bared as globs of saliva flew back from its mouth. I glimpsed a foot with several dagger-like claws extending from it. Through the mirror, me and the beast made quick eye contact, and seeing its quarry's face, it let out another human howl and quickened its pace. I was nearing the point of exhaustion and knew that I couldn't keep the pace any longer. Involuntarily beginning to slow, I had mental flashes of being torn to shreds by the creature. Just as it started to catch up, a light appeared on the road ahead. I couldn't see the vehicle yet, but waved my arms frantically. As it got closer, I could see it was another military Humvee, and it began to slow. I heard one last howl behind me, and the creature disappeared into the forest alongside the road. The truck came to a stop just as I reached it, and several soldiers jumped out. They began questioning why I was there and how I'd gotten past the checkpoint. I explained there was no checkpoint and that I was just on my way home. One of the soldiers walked away talking into a radio, and the others began to question why I waved them down and why I was so obviously distraught. The story just flooded out of my mouth, and throughout they continued giving each other looks, and one even took a few notes. When I was done, one of the soldiers told me that the rock slide in the area must have agitated the few bears around, and that's what I had seen. I tried explaining that was not the case at all, but he insisted that I had seen a bear. The man who walked away came back to confirm that no checkpoint was placed on the road, and they offered to give me a ride the rest of the way. I don't think I was really being given a choice and would have accepted anyway. They didn't say a word on the ride, and where they eventually left me off was a short distance from my house. I know without any doubt in my mind that it wasn't a bear. Whatever that thing was, well, you can't find it in a zoo, that's for sure. Has anybody else seen anything like this? I don't know how this past winter was for you in whatever state you're living in, but over here in Western Pennsylvania, it was pretty crazy, crazier than usual, which is saying a lot considering we're a state that gets hit with tons of snow every year. I think somewhere around 100 inches or so every year. Like I said, it's a lot of snow. You better get used to it if you're living out here. Another thing we have a lot here in Pennsylvania is wildlife, which brings me to the reason why I'm writing you. Last winter I found tracks outside my barn this one morning. Tracks I don't quite understand. They're clearly made from a canine, but no canine I know gets this big. I'll have to upload the pictures and send them to you via email. But I didn't want to waste your time, so I thought I'd reach out to you first, get confirmation that it's okay and send them over. They're pretty large in size, easily 12 inches if not bigger. We're talking huge canine tracks. Whatever made this had to have easily been the size of a grizzly bear, if not bigger. I know that doesn't even sound possible, but I cannot think for the life of me what dog breed can make these. The other thing that really bothers me is the track pattern is not quadrupedal, meaning it isn't from a four-legged animal. Judging by the way the stride is, it appears to be more bipedal. You can clearly see the stride pattern. It's like somebody was walking on two legs, walking around. And the other weird thing, wearing fake, werewolf-canted boots. The impression in the snow is quite deep, meaning that whatever made these tracks not only had tremendous stride, but must have weighed a considerable amount. I'm around 270 pounds, a bigger guy if you will, and I'm 6'2". Even me with all my snow gear on, and my boots can't even make half the indent as these do. So something is out there doing this. I know of dogmen, and I've heard their legends all around the entire Great Lakes area, from Wisconsin to Michigan, and even all over Western Pennsylvania. I've never seen one myself, but I've heard many stories from friends and family growing up. I never really wanted to believe they existed, but now I guess I have no choice but to second guess. The footprints actually come out of a small section of woods that back up to acres and acres of national forest. The small section of woods kind of tails out down to around where my house is and where the neighborhood is. I would say from my pond to the small section of woods or tree line is maybe 100 yards, but I haven't actually measured. The tracks lead all the way from the tree line to my barn and then just seem to disappear. There are no traces of which direction it went, and I don't think it jumped on my roof considering my barn is roughly 20 plus feet high. So I'm not really sure what to make of this. The tracks just literally disappear right as they go up against my barn. And it's the backside of the barn where there's no window, there's no door. I currently do not have any live animals, just old hay and old barn supplies. So I'm not sure if there was anything remotely interesting for whatever animal making this to get into. I don't know. I have far more questions than answers, and I'm hoping with your aid you can help me answer many of them. Thanks for your time.